Greetings and good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Miranda Carmen. I'm with the Indian Law Resource Center. Saludos y buenas tardes. Bienvenidos. Mi nombre es Miranda Carmen. Estoy con el Indian Law Resource Center. Saudações e boa tarde. Bem-vindo. Meu nome é Miranda Carmen. Estou como Indian Law Resource Center. Before we get started officially, I'm going to give a short technical introduction since today's webinar has simultaneous interpretation in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. I will also put these instructions in the chat as well. Antes de comenzamos oficialmente, daré una breve introducción técnica, ya que este webinar tiene interpretación simultánea en inglés, español y portugués. También pondré estas instrucciones en el chat. Antes de começarmos oficialmente, eu farei uma breve introdução técnica, pois o webinar tem tradução simultânea em inglês, espanhol e português. Também colocarei essas instruções no chat. So from a computer or a laptop, locate the globe icon on the bottom right side of your Zoom screen. Click on the icon and click on the language you wish to hear. For example, English speakers should choose English. Please remain on your selected channel for the duration of the event. Everybody must be on a language channel. From a tablet or cell phone, tap the More icon. From there, click on the globe icon and select your language channel. All other instructions remain the same. Desde una computadora o laptop, ubique y haga clic en el icono de globo en la esquina inferior derecha de su pantalla de Zoom. Haga clic en el idioma que le gustaría escuchar. Por ejemplo, los hispanohablantes deben elegir el español. Por favor, permanezca en su canal de idioma durante todo el evento. Todos deben estar en un canal de idioma. Desde un tablet o celular, toque el icono de More con los tres puntillos en su pantalla de Zoom. Desde ahí, toque el icono de globo y seleccione su canal de idioma. Todas las demás instrucciones siguen siendo las mismas. Desde un computador o laptop, localize y clique no icono de globo na esquina inferior direita da sua tela de Zoom. Clique no idioma que você gostaria de ouvir. Por exemplo, os falantes de português devem escolher o português. Por favor, fiquem em seu canal de idioma durante todo o evento. Todos devem estar no canal de idioma. Desde um tablet ou celular, clique no ícone de More com os três pontinhos em sua tela de Zoom. A partir daí, clique no ícone de globo e selecione seu canal de idioma. Todas as outras instruções permanecem as mesmas. For any other technical questions, please use the chat. Para qualquer outra pergunta técnica, por favor, utilize o chat. Para qualquer outra questão técnica, por favor, utilize o chat. A recording of this event will be available on our website and automatically sent to your email a day after the event. Una grabación de este evento estará disponible en nuestro sitio web y se enviará automáticamente a su correo electrónico un día después del evento. Una grabación de este evento estará disponible en nuestro sitio y enviada automaticamente para seu email dia após o evento. Thank you and I hope you enjoy our event. Gracias y espero que disfruten de nuestro evento. Obrigada y espero que gusten de nuestro evento.
To our esteemed panelists from throughout the Western Hemisphere, our colleagues and advocates, and all of our guests, welcome and thank you for joining our event during the NGO CSW 67 Forum, a global gathering that runs parallel to the annual session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women and offers a space to raise many different issues impacting women's rights. This is also International Women's Day. Today, we honor and celebrate all women with a special shout out to those Indigenous women and Indigenous organizations that are working to protect Indigenous women's rights, which include those individual human rights and collective rights recognized in both the UN and the American Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. My name is Jana Walker, and I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and Delaware Indian Tribe. I'm also of loyal Shawnee descent. I'm a senior attorney at the Indian Law Resource Center and also direct our Safe Women, Strong Nations project that works to end the extreme levels of violence against Indigenous women. Besides the Indian Law Resource Center, co-sponsors of this event include the Coordination of the Indigenous Organizations of the Brazilian Amazon, the International Mayan League, the Interethnic Association for the Development of the Peruvian Amazon, the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, the Native Women's Society of the Great Plains, and the Pohana Ona Wahine. Our parallel event focuses on violence against rural Indigenous women, Brazil, Guatemala, Peru, and the United States. International human rights experts, including the UN Commission on the Status of Women, have recognized that Indigenous women often suffer multiple intersecting forms of discrimination
múltiplas
that increase
discriminações.
their vulnerability to all forms of violence. Our panel of Indigenous women advocates and experts will discuss how violations of Indigenous peoples' land rights and rights of self-government expose their women and girls to systemic discrimination, gender-based violence, and other human rights violations, and how living in rural Indigenous communities intensifies these problems. When you further add the impacts of climate change, environmental degradation, and the pandemic, a perfect storm for violence against Indigenous women is created. What are the challenges for these rural Indigenous communities, and how are these Indigenous organizations rising to meet them? The panel will proceed by countries: Brazil, Guatemala, Peru, and then the United States. And each speaker will offer their own introduction. With that, I turn the virtual stage over to Jadid.
Thank you, Jana. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Cari Guajajara. I am an Indigenous woman from the Brazilian Amazon. I am a lawyer. I have studied at the University of Brasilia, and I compose the legal panel of COIAB and COIAPIMA, which is the organization and articulation of Indigenous peoples from Maranhão. And COIAB is the organization of Brazilian Indigenous people. And its mission is the defense of the rights of the Indigenous peoples to health, education, culture, and self-determination. Today, COIAB mobilizes hundreds of peoples, more or less 440 individuals, and this represents 40% of the Indigenous populations of the country, which occupies collectively a number of 110 million of hectares in all the states of the Brazilian Amazon: Amazonas, Tocantins, Pará, Amapá, Maranhão, Acre, Pará, Rondônia, and Mato Grosso. The organization COIAB struggles for the isolated peoples and that are hard to reach. And we have 114 contacts with these peoples. One of our representatives is COICA, and we are also a member of APIP, which is the Association of an Organization of Indigenous Peoples in Brazil. I'd like to begin saying that I'm glad to be here with references from this topic of struggle that women face. And now, considering the Brazilian context, when we affirm that the violations against the rights of Indigenous peoples, especially those related to land and self-governance, and that reaches specifically women and girls, what we want to say is that we want to break the silences that we have in the history of Brazil. Because of my time, I'm only going to speak about one of these processes, the silencing processes, which is imposed upon Brazilian women in Brazil. Brazilian women, sorry. So this is the attempt to, there is an attempt to shade, to silence topics regarding gender. And from the perspective of, I cite examples of gender and violence, which are categories that historically shows us that sometimes they are used to reproduce forms of colonialism, hiding diversity which is not in the desired patterns, let's say. So I consider that these categories that transversalize our realities should be analyzed jointly with an ethnical view, and not to put it on a secondary analysis. The ethnical view has to be accompanied of those categories in a primary moment and not secondary moment, and as a form to consider the perspectives of women that are living in specific realities. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that to debate violence against women, we should consider that there is a broad list in considerations of what is to be women, what it is like to be women. And these categories that are used to talk about this topic should be used to have a dialogue among those categories. These topics do not have to, they have to connect our realities, and these categories should be used in this sense of connection among relations and the society. Specifically regarding Indigenous women, it is necessary to say that because of the specificity of the identities we have, we suffer from vulnerabilities that are very specific to us. How the specific consequences about ethnical women or racial topics are hidden in these broader categories, the extension of this intersectional scenario should be considered regularly. And so we can understand this affirmation, I cite the illegal mining we have today, because it represents one of the main factors of promotion of violence against Brazilian women. Many of the territories, indigenous territories and their people are pressured by the intensification of illegal mining. So the illegal mining is considered one of the main causes of violence in Brazil against indigenous peoples. And so we have many diseases being transmitted, and we have violences, other kinds of violence intensified against the indigenous peoples. And one specific topic about it is the Yanomami territory. And we have a humanitarian crisis saying it is saying how much, it is showing how much we have this kind of problem. And I say this because the territories are being invaded and violated, and women and the indigenous women have this strong bond. So the violence against indigenous peoples actually have as special target this violence against women. So besides this, we have a reality in which the richnesses are usurped, the natural resources, and the land is contaminated as the waters, destroying the sources of life for indigenous women. And also these miners offer food for sex with the girls. And also there is the consumption of alcohol used to seduce, try and seduce girls. And so they get contaminated by sexual transmitted diseases. So in the majority, we have, they are crimes. So it makes us question, so why aren't these crimes punished when they are practiced against Indigenous women? Can any of these countries here break with this cycle of violence against women to try and deal with the diversity, with the specific diversity aspects of our scenario? Does the state, the Brazilian state, consider Brazilian women as people that should have rights? Really, this we should discuss later. Another aspect that illegal mining brings us is that what are the countries, what are they considering as violence against women? And is this enough for the reality faced by the majority of women? There is the contamination of mercury as well. And Indigenous girls and women are being affected very specifically in childhood. They accumulate a substance in their bodies through the ingestion of fish and waters. And when they reach their reproductive age, they have miscarriages, and they transmit this mercury. When they're pregnant, they transmit it to the babies. And so they begin their lives already contaminated. And it also provokes food insecurities. And there are other kinds of diseases, such as malaria, that affects them. So due to the illegal mining problem they have to face and other kinds of offenses against their rights, many Indigenous women are being pushed and are suffering violence. These two women I have mentioned risk their lives on a daily basis. They suffer violence and death threats, and they represent a systematic violence against these women. There is the coordinator of Arapiun's project in Tapajós, has suffered a long list of violence, of threats of violence. And recently she has suffered death threats because she is fighting against timber, against logging, illegal logging. And so I guess the reflection we should do is, what can configure a violence against women, if not the persistent struggle from these women for their rights? These women are fighting for their lives and of their kids, of their peoples, and of the Amazon. And sometimes they suffer from the violence from the state. So we cannot disconnect the reality that is faced by them, because the problems that I have talked about, they face it because they are part women and part because they are Indigenous. And there is no possible solution for this scenario that they live in if we cannot think of a generalization of treatments. We need to reconsider every day what they have to be heard in all of their processes. And they are trying to pursue to overcome these problems that are caused by the government and other actors. And so we should consider what these women are saying and what are they considering about the violence that is made against them. And this is what I had to say. I thank you for the opportunity, Jana.
Thank you. So we will move on to Guatemala.
Então,
I am in the English channel. If you can hear me, English channel. As the Executive Director of the International Mayan League, it is an honor and a pleasure for me to be here with you this morning from Piscataway Nation territory to share about our work and our human rights defense with our peoples, both here in diaspora as well as in our ancestral lands. The fight that women have in particular with our peoples and nations is closely related to defending Mother Earth and our very life and existence. And that's why this presentation is called Mother Earth is Life, Water is Life. We're going to focus later on in the presentation on the particular situation facing the Maya Kikchi community and the ways in which it impacts women, children, girls, elders under state repression. As we know, root drivers of land dispossession for Indigenous peoples is closely tied to the invasion of more than 500 years of dispossession and genocide that has disproportionately affected Indigenous peoples throughout all of Abya Yala, not just in Guatemala. The colonial processes and systems that were rooted in and over our lands and territories are closely tied to laws and policies that perpetuate racism, discrimination, and genocide. Many of our leaders have talked about eras of dispossession, and these eras of dispossession are characterized by 4 waves. And most recently, Dr. Gio Butts published a book detailing these 4 invasions. And right now, from many of our leaders, we talk about living in the wave of the 4th dispossession, the 4th era, characterized by the imposition of corporations, neoliberal policies, and widespread resource extraction from our lands and territories, disproportionately affecting our peoples and communities. This photo that comes from December 6th, 2022, as you will hear later in the presentation from Autoridad Maria Alcal, shows the way in which the state of Guatemala is repressing our people through militarization, through violence to take our lands and our territories. And as one ancestral authority talks about, he says, no one is an invader or a thief on their own ancestral lands. And that's what we are treated. We are treated as invaders, as illegal, as thieves in our own lands, when what we are talking about is defense of what has historically been ours. These are Indigenous lands. It is well documented through the verification of UN systems, such as the visit of the UN Special Rapporteur, Mr. James.
temos um repertório especial.
Cuando se habla de las formas desproporcionadas en las cuales la tierra
Peoples. I will go ahead and just end with the recommendations where we ask for the state to request a thorough investigation of all the human rights situations that are occurring. We also ask for the protection of Indigenous peoples' rights of self-determination over our lands, territories, and natural resources or goods of the earth, and that any human rights reports related to the situations affecting our communities have a particular lens on the rights of Indigenous women, children, girls, LGBTQ2S+ communities. And now it is my honor and privilege to welcome from Maya Kekchi Nation Territory, Autoridad Maria Cal, who we will have a video talking about what occurred on December 6th of 2022. And then we'll have words from Maya Kekchi Nation Territory. Miranda, if you could go ahead and cue up the video. Thank you.
Thank you, Juanita. I will get that started right now. Sorry about that, everybody. I'm hearing that there is no audio. I'm going to try to share this another way. This is important video. Bear with me. Technical issues.
Acho am ni kau panas pilih dah. Tengok lihat. Acho am dah. Lain kana Maria ka alko. Arin kontin sa chapinawa. Selesai de diciembre, se espuale en esa fin. Kisha wali kik uthaye kikamto ke am salip anle utkwan se kana heridos na paliplom na palipu sa se puag takal salip al se shibet sakali ale. Tienes chap, tienes amaran set salam. Chilish col al dirish ni na church. Pero kung puta na ki isingkwan jakaran. Raw tesili kalepan chikunili kalepan se raw tesir ili ligas. An mas se skut sa kalepan liko al kwangge to. Ang saman to ha uputan sti or hike ut kwangge li is kwangge sa tuam. Uno karaw tetengkil di polisi di antimotin a las 4 de la mañana kwangge sa lipe. Para se kulung para se rak se am se salam liking tore na se spohe liking se pim tons to na se oktak sa li alipal se erkat se am li tuming takirus ul li kwang gre la kastet en sa li ochot se am ut se petit huni sa li tienda se sket di se kem di huni li gasios kwan sa se sket Handi polisi se banung kre ut li militar. Shop ti hunilik alukelik ilukwang se sporili roper se ati hunilis en senta kwanza. So ship esi ut so esket la oli ish se schmidt di kisman. Hasta hulik kech iskilal se disiliki se ru. Okay, kutan dash numik lisi ba anak se enak se kaya ikihunil likidisia narinas tapinawa. Se enak Laila iskolom kats pa se keret kontoy ko ni ko ula ani ke skui apenas yoga eskolan gila na kwang bes de kamus alla ol is kanak na so es rau tesi se smus la kakulu se smus la derecho pans derecho liko al se smus liko al ha pe vire ma ke shiu na skol se kolungli antimotin ni en militar smus ale listu am la kakal saan naging batsunde la katu am naging batsunde di kausaha ish hanaan di diretso anak kahlao kumulao kasi yusut se ulong chiruli 2022 porque li empresa natura aceite haan nas taklahe chak se pues nas tohe chak kana naging tsadya kasi singil maklitumin nas chak nas takla sa polisi Lima Alejandro Yamatay. Tina llena cuando de acuerdo porque no escucho de tu mentiru. La oli isk arin chapin abajo na koli ish ni na church. Y cuando consil ekutan hane lo kana katukwa halimama tisa. Ane ba si se cuando te wala mintilin is kwang arin chapin abajo. Na kwang ko chilao makila na kwang kaya kalal tons tentonas akol gidi sila haan li railalis akul pas nag-usa lain na haan tarak lina til tanamit is il takirish tenak te ilya krahirish irish li railalis is paano ke pues saan li asil din taklare ha nak maliha ne rakiptes kaya taklilu ha te ditas to baliku nak Lao Joko Chiraho Tesi Kai Salikana Tapinabajo. Mareja la chites li ram pues te ves la chak na lao Joko aliran. Tiene la palabra kapol. Tiene liko is liko tahom lao Joko ali dirailan sa in. Ane la kako al na banis pol alilis na chot. Ritangiro din lo alain hana kis lo alin na chot. Tena antis finish. El tekem, este kem di kuala ling ahol ho panak. Nanjaling tidis ni na chot. Ta oli ish nako nakachuduk ke bas nako mayehak nako tihok dos. O panakin nako keng nakmat li chika king hilal nako shika kila o chika hilal. Nako shika kilil balik at sinagpal. Neptak ning anak at juga ang sila chak tons nake may hat silis din na church ut nake patsok tiru pena antes kakwa kupa nake tihok tak tiru la olah ekti mo ko kahunesta kwan li ahaw kwan li lo la suta aan nako rabi nago tihok tiru nako rabi hula nakapats kawa o panak panaan ni nagkuteng nagke mayakaksak la oli liish kung taet kalokal ilingat och kugana hanes kele patsekem hanes kele titekang de kalaw katakol utna po naknapo kam hiara nakito to sok ya nakit ulang ka pues ditsulta te nang uslat tilish na chiru na ko amaning chiru na ko ti hok pre na ka antora pi pre na kang ara chik mas chalo li chakilan na kang ara ki na ko ti hok mare anchal mas na para sa Espano utan rahlal hula hula na ko ti hok no kana Dios ta saktora pi pre na ti pot tara sak shamlel si funil arayna la indi nakakul pues nag-ulalain na rakta li sa kilalain istilah chakirish linahtil tenamit internasyonal nakikitoki na istilah chakirish na araylalain ing ara chinakahanakil ara chitkayul porque ra sakalos lishkayul dahil sa iskula kako alhape bilesh mo kaleri sa iskuri sa lilancha mga kanakajoga ikang maligas lain kana Maria ka alpok nan taklas sa ile all to hunilesh li ish kung kesas sutam tiskunil li ar kung katsasya na kung ilitialok ay tidish ni na tidish li ot nan taklas sa ile all kawak tara siya kay all arin kung kin sa tapinawa Wala nagpapaham ng love is directly what is directly okay. Ay, nampak lain, siruli chakra. Nakanakiarap din ang chakra sa polisi, ako po nag-isuwat di ko kal. Ako nag-isuwat, mag-alay listik. Ba't pa tiyo tayo sikil ko kal, maka-in listik. Kasi ko kal, hayat sa kan.
To welcome Autoridad Maria Cal.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Maria and Juanita, for bringing this very
Wait.
powerful.
We still have her. They're speaking right now.
Okay.
It was a child of 13 years old, an adolescent, that it was injured. She was shot, actually. I think it was very difficult because you don't have anyone to defend us.
Estamos aquí muy
Para tuloy ka na, kapunes. Wang kay siya ang
I ask you all that are together, that help us, listen to us. Listen to our claim. We are here in Tupinabajo. We are suffering. You didn't want to suffer like this anymore. These are my words for you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Maria and Juanita, for bringing this powerful film and showing it for our event, and for all of your message and words. We appreciate that. Like to move on to Teresita.
Muy buenas tardes con todos. He estado escuchando muy atentamente las presentaciones.
So I'm listening to the presentations and I'm going to speak a little about Peru. My organization is IDESEP. IDESEP is an organization that has 9 regions. This is the Association for the Development of the Amazon. We have 9 regional representatives. And we have federations and communities. Approximately 2,400 communities that are recognized. And we have communal reserves of the isolated peoples. IDESEP is an organization in Peru that is representative and is working for the indigenous rights. We have diverse peoples in the Peruvian Amazon, and IDESEP has an agenda. We call it the Great Agenda. This agenda has been worked by the 9 representatives, and they deal with the urgent priorities of the peoples. I am from the Amazoni people, and we are here representing different nations. Inside the same organization, we are quite diverse. So we have 15 proposals, but I'm going to focus on the women's point. And on the 15th point of the agenda, in which it is guaranteed the participation of women in all of levels of decision making in the states and regions. And this is an agenda that has been approved, that was approved last year. This is something that we have been already practicing. The women's program. It's been many years that it has been worked, it has been put on, and it had a little bit of a change last year, saying that there should be an egalitarian participation between men and women. Before that, it was only men. So I want to explain that I'm from the people Yameshan, and in my culture, we learn that our mother is our land. Our father is only one. The nature, everything that is on our surroundings is family. Our grandmother, for example, is a tiger, and it should be respected. Everything that is on our surroundings is our family. And that is why we know that our tree is our sister, the river is our uncle. So it is a relation that is fraternal, is very friendly. That's why we respect nature a lot. It is the cosmovision that we have learned. But our culture has also taught us that women are not equal to men. Who is more entitled to rights in our culture is men. We learn that men go out to work, men can travel, and women have to remain at home, taking care of children, doing their house chores. And this is what we have learned. I'm from that generation still. My grandparents said that when I wanted to get out of my house, they told my mom, why is a woman sitting among men? And why is a woman going out? So our culture has taught us about this. And when the schools arrived, they said that only men could study because they could travel, they could solve things. They should be in their leadership. And women had to be at home, taking care of the children and taking care of other things. So in my time, it was still like that. So if it was for my grandparents, I wouldn't go to school, for example. So I come from a big family. We are 9 women and 6 men. This is my home. We grew up with this idea that we should serve our parents and our brothers. But I have already heard things from a colleague, and I would ask my mom, why can't women be leaders? Why can't we study? And my mom used to answer, this is our culture. Things are like this. We should respect that. But my father had another idea, maybe because he lived beside a city, and he said, no, our women have to study. So my daughters have to study. They have to go to school. This way, my father promoted my mother used to live outside the city. So my father encouraged us and my mother for us to study. But in this neighborhood that I lived in, there were differences. And we used to ask ourselves, why do we have these differences between us and the people that live in the cities? And my mother used to say that, oh, it's because they have money. And I used to ask my mother, but why don't I have shoes? Why do they have shoes? Why do they go to school and I don't? So my parents began to understand that we should study. In this way, I began to study and then began to work. It became a kind of a rebel. And this way I opened a path so that women could participate. And in the community, I taught women how to read and write, how to make a shirt. And this was a big thing during this period. So I began to learn more things, and I was nominated as a secretary of an organization, and then I began to improve my knowledge and my leadership this way. We formed an organization since we were far away. I lived on the other side of the river. Sorry, internet problems. So everybody was asking, what's she doing that? Why does she want women to have to understand about their rights? So this way, in that organization, I was called by them because they could see my leadership. And so I was called to go, I was invited to go to a Congress of IDESAP. And until then, we didn't have a women's leadership. So they were almost all of them were teachers. I wasn't, though. I was the leader of my community. And then we had the condition that the woman that would come into that would have that role should be the leader of the federation and of the region. So the teachers looked at themselves. Nobody had that experience, but Teresita. So Teresita should be our representative, they thought. So I never thought I would arrive at IDESAP. I actually always thought I would be in that community. And because of the impulse of the encouragement of the other women, which who used to say, no, you have to open the path for the other women. So I was called to work at the Secretary of Women. And I didn't know what would happen on the national level, but it was a very good experience because I got to know people that helped me. I could get to know organizations that helped us, and people said I should do a program. And I asked the secretary actually to become a program for women. And at IDESAP is formed by 54 communities, indigenous communities, and a lot of them used to say, no, women can't participate. They have to take care of their children. They don't know anything. But I knew what I wanted to do. So I need to get this. I have to do this. This way, we could continue, it could go on. And the first year, I went alone. But on the next year, in 2006 and 2008, I had a secretary and an accountant. On another year, we had another leadership, woman leadership. And another woman became the president. of the organization. So somehow we could, throughout the years, we could form the Indigenous program for women. The Indigenous Women's Program was created, and we have advanced a lot. We are working on the modification of statutes, how to guarantee the leadership regionally and nationally as well. We have a program for political participation and for other things that still need to be done. We have many challenges ahead. We have an agenda for the women in those regions, and of course it needs to be done. At some point I would like to share our agenda with you, but it has been really good to be here discussing things with you, telling you how our program has been advancing. I want to give clarity on how things are being done by us in the Amazon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Teresita. That was very, very good to learn how the women's program has come about and is advancing with IDASEP. We will now move on to the United States, and we'll start with Paula.
Thank you so much, Jana and Chris, and to all the sisters who have spoken earlier today. Happy Strong-Hearted International Women's Day. I'm Paula Julian with the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, or NIWRC. We are dedicated to restoring the sovereignty of American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian nations to increase the safety and healing of Indigenous women. I am calling from the lands of the Peamcowicham, or people of the West, on the La Jolla Indian Reservation, an hour north of San Diego, California. We call on the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women to adopt our 2 recommendations at this 67th session this month. I believe Chris may be sharing the recommendations at the end of our session today. We stand in resistance with our relatives, our sisters in their Indigenous homeland communities in Brazil, Guatemala, and Peru. Similar to violence against Indigenous women across the world, violence against Indigenous women in the United States is tied to the stealing and exploitation of Indigenous homelands and resources by non-Indigenous governments, sectors, industries, and peoples. Such violence is reflected, as our sisters have spoken about earlier, in the disproportionate rates of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual abuse and sexual assault, sex trafficking, the injustice of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and other health, economic, and social disparities, which are exacerbated in Indigenous rural communities across the United States. Our rural communities struggle with a lack of resources to support their infrastructures to respond in more comprehensive ways to violence against Indigenous women. From the lack of emergency shelters, safe housing, and dedicated programs to help prevent and respond to violence against Indigenous women. And I won't even speak to the failures of the justice system in the United States. The United Nations Commission on the Status of Women must help to hold accountable governments who violate the human rights of Indigenous women and their families every day, as we saw in that beautiful, that our sister Maria presented from her homelands in Guatemala. Indigenous sisters from Alaska, Hawaii, and the Plains region of the United States will share the barriers and challenges their women and nations have experienced, including challenges to their sovereign nation's governmental authority to protect their citizens, and the failure of the U.S. government to fulfill their legal, moral, and financial responsibility to Indian tribal governments and Native Hawaiians. We also know that the most effective solutions must be centered on the leadership and cultures of Indigenous women and their Indigenous nations. Please see our 6-point action plan and February Restoration Magazine edition, which I believe is available in the chat, or Indian Law Resource Center will be sharing on the website for more information. Again, thank you. And I will turn this over to, I think, the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center and Tammy Truitt-Giroux. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I hope that's the plan. So let's see. All right. So let me just. So I am very honored to be here. I'm Adet Tammy Truitt-Giroux Seezra. I am a citizen of the Anvik tribe, which is located on the Yukon River, what they call the lower Yukon River. And I think it's, you know, the river being one of our lifeways, I think is a really important discussion here, as I've heard from the very courageous women from South America. I am been doing this work for a rather long time, and I am really grateful that we have the opportunity to do this today. Again, my name is Tammy, and I am a citizen of Anvik, but I also am very proud to be the mother of 4 wonderful children and 6 grandchildren. So I think that's the part always having to remember when we do this work. And so I just want to share a little bit about the Resource Center. I'm hoping you can see my slides, yes? Okay. In 2015, the Resource Center was dedicated or was formed because of the fact that we, and I mean many women advocates around in many of our small, very isolated communities in the North, were really tired of not having any answers or resources to deal with the high rates of violence that impact women and children every day, and trying to attempt to find answers through tribal authority, through laws and policies that impact and or can help folks in their local communities become more independent in terms of the resources needed to really take away the historical aspect of the violence. I think the incredible thing about all of the violence and the things that have happened to people living in the villages. There's 229 distinct tribal nations in Alaska, and they are all, except for maybe a handful, are isolated communities where you have to fly in by airplane. You might be able to access by boat or snow machine. And so getting to these communities can sometimes be extremely challenging. So finding the answers within our communities has been a very important point. And the mission that the Resource Center envisions is that tribal women and communities and families are free from violence. It's simple. It seems like it's simple, but it's very complex. So I want to show you a little bit about the complexity, if I can make that move. There we go. So if you look at this, Alaska is the largest state in the United States. Basically, we have 663 I can't even say it. We have over 663,000 square miles. That's almost 3 times the size of Texas and 3 times the size of France. Home to 229 of the 574 federally recognized tribes, so 40% of federally recognized tribes in the nation. And in 86% of those communities and villages, they are not connected to the roads. There's no roads into those communities whatsoever. And so there's approximately about 140,000 Alaska Natives that live in Alaska. So give or take 19% of Alaska. And we have 20 very distinct cultures and over 300 dialects of language in our tribal communities. When we talked about the violence against rural Indigenous women and the way of life for Alaska, I was really moved by the fact that Mother Earth and the land and the connection to that land is so very important to the people, and that all of our people who are living in our communities are able to connect to that land, and the land sustains them. The problem that has arisen is that because of the resources, other people want those resources. When they want those resources and they try to take those resources without giving anything back, that's when this violence became more prevalent. And I'm talking about back in the day, in history, but the isolation protected some of our communities in the early days of exploration also. So there was that. But I think it's important to understand that Alaska Native women are overrepresented in domestic violence or death or disappearance by over 250%. If you have a state that's comprised of only 19% of the state's population is Alaska Native, and then 47% are reported rape victims. And that's just the reported rape victims. Most people don't even choose to report. And as compared to the population of Indian tribes, Alaska Native women suffer the highest rates of domestic and sexual violence in the United States. The rate of Alaska Native women that are killed by men in Alaska is 12.62% per 100,000 women. That's 12 people too many. And unfortunately, there are 3.5 times more likely for Alaska women to just be targeted in so many different aspects of the world, which are really not, well, yeah, all right. I think one of the biggest issues that we find in Alaska Native villages in the rural areas is the access to justice. The state of Alaska has a concurrent role to work with Alaska tribes to help provide justice to many of the communities that may be suffering or need that assistance. And so it's really important that the Alaska Department of Public Safety, which is what we call the Alaska State Troopers oftentimes, is primarily responsible for law enforcement in rural Alaska, but provides only 1 to 1.4 field officers per 1 million acres. I don't think I can even imagine the whole how vast that is. And I think that we have a tribal leader from Askamaro Indian tribe that is located in rural Alaska, Catherine Moses, and she states that it's really important to the murders and the disappearances of women and girls in Alaska is connected to the lack of protection from the state and federal governments, and the failure of federal government to provide resources to our tribes and other tribes establish a comprehensive response. So it's the normal. It's a comprehensive response, but it's the norm that they don't respond. And of course, that's justice, just the justice services that we might have needed. I think that the other piece of that happens is the access to funding programs and the services is really, it challenges all of whatever services might be available, because it's either non-existent or it's so overused that people don't have access to those services. And I think that the funding also really impacts how tribes in Alaska are able to fund their own services. And there's a lot of issues that are in place because of that. I think it's really important what one of our board members, Lenora Hooch, who is a founding mother of the first domestic violence shelter in Alaska, in terms of the village in Alaska. And I always think of this quote, and there's no place to go in villages. Women find shelter where they can. They hide in the local churches if the doors are left open, inside willows, in steam baths or fish smokehouses. We run many times with 5 children with us, and we hide under our homes in the dark, cold winter months. And in the winter here can be well below 0 at any given time. The weather can be horrible, and so there's no protection from that. That's why they began that shelter in their community, in order to have a safe place for women and children to go. I think I want to do a time check, because I do want to share some of the things that we also are encouraging and working with the Indian Law Resource Center, is that we call for recommendations, access to justice, which is really critical in order for even the tribe to determine and to develop, but also to implement things in our communities that are going to work for us in our communities. And I think that's a very important piece of work that we need to do. But that includes Indigenous peoples, our political and our legal institutions, and our judicial systems, and the ways and means for financing these self-governance functions, and respecting and protecting and fulfilling Indigenous people's rights to their lands, territories, and resources. And I think the most key and the most important message with all of that, I believe, is that we have, as Indigenous peoples of the Americas, particularly, a trust relationship with the federal government. And in that relationship and in that trust, there are aspects of responsibility. And yes, our tribes have responsibility, but really the federal government has responsibility to help our tribes become able to help the people that need that help. So I appreciate your time, and I thank you for listening to me. And I know I'm a little early, but I will turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you so much. I'm going to get off share here. Okay. And so I turn it over to Sadie Youngbird.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sadie Youngbird. I'm the Executive Director of the 3 Affiliated Tribes Victim Service Program, which is on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in rural North Dakota. I am also the chairperson for the Native Women's Society of the Great Plains, which is our tribal coalition within the Great Plains region. Our program serves domestic violence, sexual violence, child sexual violence, elder abuse, human trafficking, murdered and missing women, and any other crimes that may have victims that need our assistance. I thank you, everyone, for having me today. This is a huge honor to be able to speak here. I had to narrow it down to just a couple things to talk about. So my first thing is jurisdiction. Us as Indigenous women are the only women in America that do not have protection from all of our partners. And what I mean by that is it depends on their race. So if one of our women call the cops and ask for assistance through a domestic violence situation, when the cop arrives, he's going to ask basic questions about race. What nationality are you? What nationality is your partner? And then it depends if our women get justice and protection that they deserve. If they're non-Indian and the county won't be able to have jurisdiction over them because the victim is Indian. If they're non-Indian, the tribe doesn't have jurisdiction because they're not Indian. No other race in America has to deal with that. Now, yes, there has been big moves like through VAWA with the special jurisdiction. But in all reality, there's very few tribes that are really exercising these rights. Our courts do not have the capacity. A lot of our tribal courts within the United States do not have the capacity, the law trained judges, things like that, to be able to exercise special jurisdiction. So that still leaves our women not having justice here in 2023. There's been so many hoops to jump through from the DOJ to be able to become a VAWA tribe with special jurisdiction, to have jurisdiction over non-enrolled. Why are we still the only women that have to deal with this in America? We live in America. We all should have the same rights, and we all should be able to be protected from our partners. Our next issue that we deal with frequently is our healthcare. As Indian people in America, we have access to IHS, which is the Indian Health Service, but that's still, IHS still has substandard healthcare for our people. Yes, it's required through treaty rights and promises, but they're broken promises. Like here on my reservation, you're needed to have, if you needed to have a SANE exam done, we have to travel almost 2 hours one direction for our people to have a sexual assault examination. We don't have a 24/7 hospital, even though we were promised one, and we're supposed to, every reservation is supposed to have a hospital with emergency services, and those are few and far between. Just to give you guys a little insight of the reservation that I live on, the closest Walmart is 1 hour and 10 minutes away. The closest mall is 1 hour and 10 minutes away. The closest major hospital that can do surgery, have babies, anything like that is 1 hour and 10 minutes away. And that hospital, they're very racist at that hospital. So my staff here at Victim Services, if we have a sexual assault examination that needs to be done, we drive all the way to Bismarck, which is our state capital. And that's a 2-hour drive one way. And as we all know, sexual assaults don't normally happen between 8 and 4:30. So we're driving at 3, 4 a.m., 2 hours one way, then waiting for the SANE exam to be done, which sometimes takes up to 3, 4 hours, depending on if they need medical assistance, things like that. And then still turning around and driving. So then that takes it down to the follow-up care. On our reservation, confidentiality through healthcare is a huge issue. If you're sexually assaulted and you're going back for a follow-up to do your follow-up STD check, your medical checks, things like that, nobody even wants to go to our IHS hospital because there's no confidentiality to protect our women. It's a small, close-knit reservation here. People talk, they're not thinking about the protection of people's privacy. Here on my reservation, like many others, we're rich, our land is rich in natural resources, but when our reservations were set up, a lot of reservations were just cut out of the natural resources, or somehow the government has came and superseded and used our resources that could potentially help our people. On my reservation, there was an oil boom that started in 2007. It had a huge influx of people that came to our small reservation communities. We used to be able to go to the grocery store and we would know everybody. We would go to the gas station, you would know everybody. Then all of a sudden, you didn't know anybody. You might see one person in the grocery store that you knew. And there was all these workers that were coming from everywhere that were here within our communities. Our streets used to be filled with kids riding their bikes. Once the oil boom came, people didn't allow their children out like that anymore because it wasn't safe, and we didn't know all the people that were here in our communities. With where there's money, there's also drugs and sex that come along with it. So we had increased trafficking. We didn't even know anything about human trafficking until we really started digging in and thinking about it. And then we realized that human trafficking started all the way back during early colonization when the colonizers came to America. And if you look at the Disney story, Pocahontas, that's a true story of human trafficking. It's not a Disney fairy tale. That girl was a young child and she was taken by this man who was supposed to be her prince or shining armor. In all reality, he stole a child and he married her. So our people have been exploited through years and years and years since any colonizers came to our country. And then that goes into historical trauma. We've had layers and layers of historical trauma for our Indigenous people. We've been shoved into boarding schools, taken away from our families. Basically, it's genocide. They were trying to take the Indian out of us, is the easiest way to put it. For our oil boom, we had no immediate resolution of infrastructure. We had no training, no support for victim services or law enforcement. Yes, we knew a little bit, but we weren't ready for all these big organized crimes, drug cartels, trafficking, all of that to come into our communities. They came and they wreaked havoc. And then on top of it all, there was a lot of money coming in and out for our people who had oil royalties. Within the royalties, the people that received them, they were the biggest targets of exploitation. These outsiders would get our people addicted, especially our women. There would be these, they may not necessarily even work in the oil field, but they knew they could make money here. So they'd come from places like Detroit. These non-Indian men, mostly African-American men, would come into our reservation. They would start relationships with our women. They would get them addicted to drugs like opiates and fentanyl. And then they would move in and set up shop and start selling drugs. Well, when law enforcement would start to come, they would place everything on our women, and our women are the ones who are disproportionately convicted of drug crimes, along with the abuse. Like in some of it, people were just trying to survive, and they were doing it by any means possible. Another major issue that we have is our funding. We have small pots of competitive funding that come from the Department of Justice. These are competitive funds when all tribal nations need them. But we have to fight each other to see who can write the best grant application to get funding for our, to run our programs, to make our reservation safer. Then we also have BIA funding, which comes from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That's next to nothing to truly make our reservation safe, such as like law enforcement. They may only authorize us to have 10 officers when in reality, to fill a schedule on our huge reservation with a big land base with a lake in the middle, we technically need about 30 officers to be fully scheduled so they're not overworked. But fortunately, our tribe did receive oil royalties, so we were able to use tribal dollars to hire more officers, but we still don't have enough. They're running at 14 officers right now. Like I said, we needed 30 officers to be able to survive and actually be safe. Our burnout rate here is crazy. But they need to funnel more money down to us and not make it competitive. I've talked about a lot of negatives and I just have a couple minutes left. So I would like to talk about some positives. We have a lot of positives as resilient Indigenous women. Eventually during our oil boom, we had some set aside funding that came to our program that we were able to reset and get some infrastructure in place and some policies and new ways of doing things. Right now with our jurisdiction issues, we're using loopholes like the US Supreme Court decision, the McGirt decision. Yes, we're not a VAWA tribe. We are not at the capacity to have the tribal provisions in place, but we're using loopholes. But it's not all of our different entities. We're within our reservation, we have 6 counties, and the only person that's trying to help right now is one county and one small city police that only encompasses the town of Newtown, where our base tribal building, things like that are. It's our main little community. And that chief of police, who is a woman, is willing to help and go above and beyond. We're just waiting for it to turn around and not work anymore. But another positive that we have is I have a group of dedicated staff who's been able to be creative with serving our victims. We're innovative and we try to figure it out. A lot of our women are addicted to drugs now, and they may not need shelter here at our shelter with victim services. They might not be the perfect domestic violence victim where we would normally place them. So now we're going into layers of trauma to try to find something, because our women are coming home after getting the help they need to be sober and they have nowhere to go. But at some point in time, they've been some type of victim of violence. As we know, our violence rate is disproportionate to any other race as well. So my staff tries to be creative to have more, to be able to serve more women. We've also came up with some innovative programming to try to help in different ways that isn't the traditional domestic violence, sexual violence ways of programming. We have to go through loopholes, jump through hoops, but like I said, as resilient Indigenous women, that's what we're able to do. And as long as we all stick together, we're able to do. But our major need is we need help. We need awareness on how Native women's safety is not made a priority in 2023. We need to get this figured out. Any help that the CSW could help, we'd be greatly appreciative of that. I thank you today for listening to me. I know I jumped all over, but I wanted to get as much out as I could. Thank you. And now Dolly is next.
Aloha. Sorry, I'm pretty emotional over the amount of stories that have been shared today and the recommendations. And now being the last one to present today. I really appreciate everything, and Sadie, mahalo for sharing all that you did. Let me share my screen. Oh, how do you do it? Where did it go? You open up the slide. How you do it?
Sorry, we're opening up our slide deck.
Where do you have it? Oh, down there. You have to put it on your. Oh, shucks. Like that. And how do you share this? Okay. How do you share the thingy?
It's sharing. Let me see what it's sharing. It's sharing.
But how do you get out of this?
You want to get out of it?
Just presentation.
Oh.
I think we can see it. You are definitely sharing the screen.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not sure why I cannot get out of the presentation mode.
What you'll want to do is go to slideshow, and then I think from slideshow you can hit play. I think I'm.
I guess well Dana helps with that. So I'm Dolly and this is Dana. I'm Dolly. I'm one of the board members from Pohana'ona Wahine, Pillars of Women. Dana is our executive director for Pohana'ona Wahine here in Hawaii. We are a nonprofit or organization, started as grassroots. Now we've been nonprofit for at least a couple of years now, and recently awarded a FIPSA grant to become the first Native Hawaiian Resource Center on Domestic Violence. And a lot of our heart and just our whole, we're deeply in gratitude for the help from our sisters from NIWRC and our Alaska sisters and all those, all the tribes and sisters that have been able to help uplift us during this time. Yeah.
So yeah, aloha, my kako, everyone. I must echo everything Dolly said. Stories that we've heard this morning have been very moving. It's been very touching for us. And Sadie, I have to say, like your speech was just so powerful because it's a lot of things that we also encounter and wanted to talk about this morning as well. So to open our presentation, there is the title, which we call that an olelo no'ea, or saying in the Native Hawaiian culture. And as I was preparing the presentation, I was seeking something to speak to me. And toward the end, this olelo no'ea came out, and I said that really holds true to what we wanted to share today. So in our language, it says, Ike aku, Ike mai, kokua aku, kokua mai, hala ihola ka nohana, ohana. So it's basically saying recognizing others to be recognized, helping others to be helped, such as in a family relationship. And that is exactly what we need to do. We need to continue to uphold, care, provide protection for our women and children, despite of all the adversities we have, because at the end of the day, Mother Earth, our water, our women, our children are all connected. And it's our responsibility, our kuleana, to continue to carry out this work. So this is why we open with this olelo no'ea with you today.
How do you go next? How do you go next?
Okay, so as Dolly shared, we are currently federally funded. So we do share our disclaimer that this project is supported by FIPSA, which we're so grateful for.
And just like last year, this is our second year participating in this event. And, you know, I guess, you know, the Queen that always comes to mind, because it was during a time of a lot of things surfacing and turmoil and changes and just a lot of pain. And so we never truly, we haven't been able to truly let go or release that pain because it's still with us. So one thing that we usually like to do is kind of open the space and bring us out together. And one of the ways in which we do that, because Lio Kalani, of who you see right here, or Lydia Kamakaeha, as we also know her as, she was a wonderful songwriter, a woman of grace and aloha and peace. There was a lot of strength and humility in who she was. We wanted to honor her and all of the women and men during that time by singing a song. Usually we do a prayer or a chant or something like that. But, you know, with all of the stories that were shared today, we offer this song to all of you. And just a reminder of the pain that we still continue to endure today because our identities have been shifted. And in this song, which is called Makalapua, the opening flower, reminds us of the Queen, but it also reminds us of each and every one of us and how connected we are. And I'm not going to sing the whole song, but just a part of it. And make sure you join me too. If you know it, sing along with us in your heart. Oh, Makalapua, Mahie, O Galeo, Kamakaeha, no Kamakaeha, Kale Nali Avahine, Navahine, Eleni la nie. Ele oi. Eleni ula nie. She was a peace warrior, an aloha warrior, and we continue to talk about her story, like I said, because the pain is still there. It hasn't gone. Our relationship with on a federal level is not clear. It's not there. It's a lot of the hevel, the things that have been committed against us, colonialism, our lives have been disrupted, and we continue to live with that today. Being questioned on why are you doing what you're doing? How can you do that? Why is water important to you? You know, things like that. And then we go back and we remember of all the shifting that has been done to our women and the things that were so a part of our culture. I mean, relationships are foundational to our families. You know, that this is the base of who we are. And that was stripped from us. And we were told that that's not important, you know. And we carry this till this day and have it fully come to a completeness in ourselves today. And this is exactly what is seen in the reports and the little reports and data that we do see, you know, in which us as a resource center is looking forward to creating more discussion and bring forward more information on what is truly happening here. There are more reports, you know, of stories of our women, you know, being hurt, you know, and not getting the help, like how Sadie was sharing, same thing, not enough programs, not enough services to be able to support our women. The protections are not there. And when we reach out to people like the police and law enforcement, and we say, hey, we need this help, you know, and if it's a repetitive calling, you know, and reach out, they decide, you know, sometimes they kind of turn their heads about it. And then that creates no hope for our women, for our children, and not having that trust in the ones that can protect us. All of our protections were taken away with displacement and colonialism, which was already innately engraved within the culture that we had carried and our ancestors had brought forward a long time ago. So let it be that we continue to remember what these things are.
And as we move into this slide, I wanted to really highlight the risk and protective factors of our people. As Dolly mentioned, shifts in our identities cause blocks and confusion. One thing that we discussed last night as we were prepping for this presentation is our names. Our names mean a lot in our culture, and they're usually gifted to you. So I can't imagine what that pain was like to have someone say, you now need to change your name to a Western name because that's how you're going to best belong. That strips you of your identity. It's like completely shattered. Who you think you are, who you know you are, you really don't know. So that to me, like, it is painful beyond words. Like, it's something that I don't think our people will ever be able to recover from. And the whole shift of being shamed to be Hawaiian, right? So that's also a risk factor because we were looked at as ignorant and uneducated and crazy for running around without clothes because it was unacceptable to the Western culture. But that is exactly who we are as Native Hawaiians. So our queen being overthrown was definitely a risk factor to us because she held that aloha and grace for us. And she was a true leader of peace. She did not like violence. She did not want violence. And to be able to hold people in place, a whole community and culture that have warrior mentality and warrior mana in them, to not react speaks for itself. So as you see everything on the screen here, I don't need to read these to you because we've all felt this. We've all known what it feels like to be invaded in our own land. But I think the most important point is to remember the resiliency in our people and the relationships we have between each other.
To kind of, I guess I'll go to the next one, but you know, women, I mean, as you've heard today already, you know, women, we are water and the water is us. And I mean, that's what our bodies are composed of in the physical, but the water reminds us of the essence of who we are as women and how sacred we are as women, you know, and so it makes sense why here in our lands, here in Hawaii, we are, you know, we have men and women that are standing for what is right in our lands. And how can we continue to live if our water is contaminated, which is what's happening in Red Hill, you know? And so it really calls for attention to our resources, which, you know, Hawaii is in the middle of the whole entire world. We are right in the middle of the world, you know, we are an island in the middle of the world. So pretty isolated from everybody else. And so our resources are not as abundant, you know, as many, you know, and when we don't have the resources here in Hawaii, like housing, you know, our water is contaminated, we don't have enough food. What is there to do but move, you know? And so recently the Council on Native Hawaiian Advancement did share that 50% of our Hawaiian brothers and sisters are actually living in Las Vegas. And what about who's here in Hawaii, you know? I mean, as the resources are scarce and not taken care of, I mean, that's what happens, you know? So that's some of the things that we are seeing.
Yeah. So just to piggyback off of that, like we know the disparities of the data regarding our Native and women and girls, right? Throughout the hemisphere, we know it's 60 to 80% of us will experience some kind of physical or sexual violence in our lifetime compared to our counterparts, right? We also understand that as Native Hawaiians, we truly uphold our value system. So what I did is included some values into our slides, and I want to highlight Malama, which is to care for and protect, and Pulama, which is to cherish. And those two values spoke loudly to me when I think about the importance of why we are having this meeting today amongst all these countries across the world, across the nation, because we all have the same desire to care for, protect, and cherish our women and girls. And this next slide here, I really want you all to pay attention to this beautiful flower. It's called the Ohialingua, and it is the one flower that is able to blossom and bloom after lava has flown and set. So if you all know the magnitude of lava, how hot it is, and how much it can clear land, because I don't want to put Pele in a negative light, but she's there to clear space. So when lava flows, it literally covers everything and it becomes solid. This is the one flower that can grow through it. So this demonstrates resiliency in and of itself. The value I want to highlight here is kokua, which is to help. And this is what we all need to remember our roles are, is to help to decrease the intergenerational trauma, to bring awareness. So therefore we are not continuing this cycle. We want to decrease the abilities of having learned behavior, because violence is not the way Native Hawaiians were raised. That is what the Western construct has taught us to be. We also want to be sure that victims and survivors get the urgent care needed and are not minimized by law enforcement. So I put in here Brother Brother Network, and that's Pidgin English. So in other words, it's the Brother Brother Network or the Good Old Boy Network, where we have officers here as well that will come out and minimize the call because, oh, you know what? It's just her. Oh, you know, they beef every weekend. So what? It's their ritual. And they don't take into accountability or the thought of how serious this is, because maybe she needs to get out. And rather than address that, like, oh, that's my friend. That's okay, bro. Go take a walk. Come back in 10 minutes. You know, it really minimizes it. So therefore, our sisters and children don't get the help that they need.
Oh, and so, you know, the disparities are that we face as Hawaiians are, I mean, there's a long list. You know, there's a lack of urgency, like I mentioned, you know, there's not, the response is not positive, or it's not there. So in that sense of what I already shared previously is the, you know, kuleana, what is the kuleana or the responsibilities of those that are the protectors of our women and children? How, I mean, do they even know what their kuleana is, and how can we support with making sure that they understand the importance of their role and in our lives, you know, as Hawaiian women? So just wanted to kind of share that. And this is something that we did share about resources earlier.
So wrapping it up, what's my kuleana? What's my responsibility? How can I help? So that's the question that's always posed upon us as a Native Hawaiian Resource Center and as individuals, first and foremost, as wahine. How do we help each other? Who can I contact? Which is why we get involved in movements and are the voices for survivors and people that cannot. So that is part of our kuleana. That's how we do it. We also want to be able to work with legislature to change things. We just don't want this to be a temporary band-aid. We want this to be permanent. Like VAWA is another thing we're looking at. Like we want to be able to have representation, not just by words, but also some kind of financial support as well. Like we matter just as everybody else does, right? We want to be able to continue to advocate, put out the kahea for change, which is the call. It's not just words, it's action. And that's what we need to do. We want to continue to talk story with our children because it's never too early to have these conversations and instill the morals and values that uphold and cherish our women as life givers and protectors and pillars of our family.
And so I guess, you know, as this slide does say, Aohe hananui ke alo ia. So no task is big when done together by all, which is how we started off in sharing our first olelo no iao, or the words of, you know, that the relationships are important, you know, and families are paramount in Hawaii. Just like a lot of our Indigenous sisters and brothers and the cultures that are found globally, it's the same. And it's the reason why we started off with a song about the flowers and the lei. So just wanted to share that, you know, I guess in part of the needs that and the recommendations, you know, it's about holding those accountable and responsible for the hewa or the wrongs that have been done, because if not, we will continue to have to share the story of our queen and the pains of our families intergenerationally, all the trauma that we've been continuously trying to work through, but really can't get the full, complete resolve without the other part of that that response, you know, and that resolution that is needed. Yeah. So let the essence of the lei of Kamakaeha or Lili'o Kalani embrace all of you as it does us during this time, as we continue to move forward and correcting the wrongs that have been done. And, you know, our love, our aloha we share with all of you. And thank you for spending time with us today.
Mahalo.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dolly and Dana and all of the other presenters. My name is Chris Foley. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation, and I'm a senior attorney at the Indian Law Resource Center with Jana Walker. And I want to thank each and every presenter that was here today for sharing the stories and news from their lands and territories. It's been, as always, it's an incredible honor and privilege to be here with you. And so thank you. And thank you to the organizations that you all work for and with, and the important work that you all are doing there on these issues of violence against Indigenous women. I want to share a couple of things. I was kind of in charge of summing things up, but with so many different presentations, it's almost impossible to imagine how I could even begin to sum any of this up. I'm going to do instead, I'm going to talk about, we have two recommendations that as a group we came together and decided on these. The first one is a recommendation that we're making to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. And we're calling on the CSW to designate the implementing Indigenous women's individual and collective rights to live lives free of violence and discrimination as a focus area. We want to have Indigenous women's rights on the formal agenda of the CSW, so that we can continue to have these conversations that we're having here today, and make sure that everyone is able to attend, and that everyone is able to hear. The messages that that we have to share are very important. The matters are grave and serious, and it's important, and we need to have the UN paying attention to what we're talking about. And one way of doing that, and one way of ensuring that happens, is by getting the CSW to place us on the on the formal agenda. So that's the first recommendation that we offer. The second one picks up on a lot of the different themes that were brought forward today. We call on the Commission, we call on the UN CSW to urge national governments to promote and protect the rights of Indigenous women and girls living in rural and remote areas by ensuring access to justice, including through Indigenous peoples' distinct political, legal institutions and juridical systems. We call on governments to ensure the ways and means for financing these Indigenous people's self-governance functions, and to respect, protect, and fulfill Indigenous people's rights to their lands, territories, and resources. Many of the presentations today picked up on these themes about land rights, about the need for to recognize Indigenous people's governments and our government's ability to function, to protect our citizens, to protect Native women living in our lands and territories, and the need for the national governments under which we live to provide the financial resources, the technical assistance that our Indigenous governments need to do that work. In the United States, the legal regime, the law in this area is pretty clear that this is how it should work. The federal government should be providing the resources to tribal governments to secure our lands and territories, to provide government services, to provide justice services, law enforcement services in our communities. And this language, this recommendation that we're offering, this isn't our own invention. This is the words of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. These are claims that countries have already agreed to. And it's important that countries live up to these responsibilities, live up to these promises that they've made. So much of the violence that Indigenous women face is the result of land invasions, of land thefts, whether that's timber industry, whether that is mining in North Dakota, whether it is gold mining in Yanomami land in Brazil. It is non-Indigenous people coming into our lands to steal resources and leave behind environmental problems, to leave behind drug and alcohol problems, to introduce disease into our lands and territories. So securing Indigenous land rights is crucial to protecting Indigenous women. I think I'll stop there. Excuse me. And close just again with thanking all of the women who spoke today. I'm so proud that you were here, and so proud that the Indian Law Resource Center was able to help organize this event. Special thanks to Miranda Carmen, my colleague in Washington, D.C., for all of her hard work in putting together all of this. It's complicated enough to do it in one language, and trying to do it with 4 languages this year, it was a real challenge, but I think it was really important to hear from everyone. So thank you again for attending. On the program, we've put it in the chat, but there's links to each of our organizations. There's email links you can find there to the presenters, I'm sure. We're all happy to answer questions. We're all happy to talk with you and engage further on this issue. There's other resources that we put in the chat, and there's also some in the on the Whova page from the CSW, so that you can get in touch with us and follow our work. thank you for coming. We look forward to working with you again in the future and seeing you soon sometime. Thank you.